Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. Medical assistance in dying, or MAiD. I 100% support people being able to die with dignity. Nothing is more personal than a person's relationship with death. I say this as someone who has had near-death experiences. When all other options are exhausted, if the end is near and all that remains in life is pain and suffering, nothing is more empowering than being able to choose how to leave this world. But it must be the person's choice, not something that is done to them. It must be free of coercion and not the result of the best of bad options. I'm going to go over what MAiD is, push back against some criticisms, and explain why this country's implementation of it is reprehensible. Before we get into it, please push buttons. Buttons are fun to push. Twitter, it's the only other platform I use. If you can, please support my channel by becoming a patron or help build my studio by purchasing something off my wish list. Link below. Every little bit helps. Long before euthanasia was talked about publicly, well before it wasn't considered taboo to bring up, and before sensational stories relating to it hit the media, I believed people should have the right to end their life early so their last days won't be in agony. We euthanize our pets so they don't suffer, so it only made sense to me that people should be allowed to make that decision for their life as well. I had formative moments early on that expanded my belief that it should be available to people even if they weren't already dying from their illness. Okay, so I was already suffering from suicidal ideation back then, so my opinion may be a little biased. So when Canada started talking about MAiD and setting up guidelines, I felt a sense of relief that we were moving in a progressive direction. I understood some people had religious objections. I'm not religious. Lots of people aren't. Religion shouldn't be dictating policy. And some people were worried about the slippery slope, that some people would be coerced into it, that it would be too easy. But that's what the guidelines were for. It wouldn't get abused. Right? Let's take a look at MAiD, the version most people are familiar with. All reports and articles I reference will be linked in the description box below. I recommend you go check them out. After this video, of course. This here is the third annual report on medical assistance in dying, and it came out in 2021. If we scroll down, let's see. Growth in numbers of medically assisted deaths in Canada continues in 2021. So there has been an increase of the use of MAiD since last year. So in total, 10,064 people used MAiD to end their lives in 2021, which accounts for 3.3% of all deaths in Canada. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we will find that the average age at the time of MAiD was provided in 2021 was 76.3 years old. I don't see any of this as bad. The increase only represents people becoming more comfortable with the idea of using MAiD. People who use it usually shorten their lives by a few weeks to a few months. People who have had loved ones pass on this way say their last moments were peaceful. People got to say their goodbyes, the person was in a comfortable environment, and there was no pain. Last year, MAiD was expanded to allow people whose deaths aren't foreseeable to apply. People with illnesses that cause deterioration in quality of life, or people with disabilities. So back here at the third annual report, we have the eligibility criteria. Request MAiD voluntarily, self-request only, 18 years of age or older, capacity to make healthcare decisions, must provide informed consent, eligibility for publicly funded healthcare services in Canada, diagnosed with a grievous and irremediable, you know what I'm trying to say, medical condition where a person must meet all of the following criteria: serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability, advanced state of irreversible decline in capability, experiencing enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them and cannot be relieved under conditions that they consider acceptable. Oh, and we'll get to this part in a moment. Mental illness as a sole underlying medical condition is excluded until March 17th of 2023. So if we scroll down, there's a lot of information, jibber jabber here. Jibber jabber, that's a word. But here's a handy little visual right here. This shows the increase of people using MAiD over the past few years. And this little red bar here represents the people whose deaths weren't in the foreseeable future, which was 2.2% of people who applied for and received MAiD, which equals out to be about 219 people. Again, I'm not against the expansion of eligibility, but this isn't being offered as a last solution, and for some people, it's the only way the government will help end their pain and suffering. Before I get to my criticisms, I want to push back on a claim that is not helpful to the conversation, but due to its shock value, gets a lot of attention. Medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending. And some of you may have seen this image being spread around social media. Oh, look, it will save the government $86 million to kill people with disabilities. When I first saw this, I was like, oh, wow, that is shocking. I need to make a video about it, calling out the government. Rage, rage, rage. So I did what almost no one else did, and I read the report. Even with my biases towards the government, I have to say objectively, this image is taken out of context and cropped for ultimate outrage. Let's zoom out a bit. So here's the report that people are pulling that image from. It's the cost estimate for Bill C7. That was the amendment to expand it to allow people with disabilities to apply for MAiD. And this was done back in October of 2020. And if we scroll down, here is the image that people are cropping out and showing to people. And you see here, net reduction in healthcare costs under Bill C14 is $86.9 million. Oh my gosh, the government's going to save $86.9 million by allowing people with disabilities to apply for MAiD. But if we scroll down to the next table, total net reduction in healthcare costs from Bill C14 plus Bill C7. So this is the bill as it was, plus the expansion of people with disabilities, the total savings would be $149 million, which sounds like a lot, but it is. Total net reduction in healthcare costs as a share of healthcare budgets, it's 0.08%. So it says expanding access to MAiD will result in a net reduction in healthcare costs for provincial governments. However, this reduction represents a negligible portion of healthcare budgets of provinces. This is an inserted correction over what I previously recorded. It is estimated the Canadian government spent over $308 billion in healthcare spending last year. Hell, the Doug Ford government lost $4.4 billion in COVID spending. It just got misplaced, and there's never been any accountability for that. In fact, I have a video about it, and yeah, it's linked below. Well, $149 million sounds like a lot to you and me, and that is a lot of money. It's just a drop in the bucket for government spending. MAiD is a government program. It has to be costed out. Reports and estimates of spending are made just like for any other government program. MAiD was not expanded to save the government money. Here's where the problem is. People can apply for MAiD after exploring all other options. For people living with disabilities, there are very few options, and if you've lived off of disability supports for any length of time, they've already been exhausted. And the cases are piling up of people using MAiD because of poverty and lack of supports. From City News, Ontario man applying for medical assisted death as an alternative to being homeless. A 54-year-old St. Catharines man is in the process of applying for medical assistance in dying, not because he wants to die, but because the social supports are failing him and he fears he may have no other choice. He describes his quality of life as awful, non-existent, and terrible. I do nothing other than manage pain. But he says the quality of life is not the reason he's applying for MAiD. He applies because he is currently in danger of losing his housing and fears being homeless. He lives in a rooming house he shares with other people, and it's currently up for sale. He's on social assistance and says he can't find anywhere else to live that he can afford. I don't want to die, but I don't want to be homeless more than I don't want to die. I know in my present health condition, I wouldn't survive it anyway. It wouldn't be at all dignified waiting, so if that becomes my two options, it's pretty much a no-brainer. Nowhere in Canada does disability supports afford even a one-bedroom apartment. From CTV News, I can't live that way. Montreal man seeking medical assisted death due to home care conditions. A month ago, death wasn't on 66-year-old Jacques. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be reading a lot of names here. I don't know how to pronounce them. On his mind, but now he doesn't know where else to turn. On Wednesday, he's meeting with a doctor to be assessed for medical assistance in dying. He had in-home care, and that in-home care changed drastically. The new people coming in through the rotating door weren't supporting him the way that he needs to be supported, which is basically trapping him in his own home. He says, running errands, working, visiting friends, it's all those moments, big and small, that come together and form a life. But these moments have been interrupted for him because he can't take care of his basic needs. And he goes into details about what might happen if he actually goes out in public. He says his dignity and autonomy has been stripped away. Is my life going to be sitting in front of a TV, wearing a diaper, sitting in stool all day long? Is that what my life is going to be? And he said, I can't live that way. And here from Global News, how poverty, not pain, is driving some disabled Canadians towards medical assisted death. And we'll scroll down. It's a long article. I recommend you go read it when you have some time. But I want to scroll down to Les Laundry. I follow him on Twitter, so I'm familiar with his story. He says he was doing good, making money, and then just over a decade ago, disaster struck and he became disabled and he developed epilepsy and 3 mini strokes. Today, he's in a wheelchair and has severe chronic pain, but that's not why he's planning to apply for MAiD. The numbers don't crunch. I will not make it. Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability, it's the poverty, it's the quality of life, he says. So he was also living on $1,685 a month and he was just barely getting by on that. But then he turned 65 and he says, what I lost is the disability benefits, the service dog allowance, special Dian's allowance, transportation allowance. He says, I'm no longer a person with a disability. I'm a senior citizen in poverty. And he worries that with the loss of income and rising prices, he may too soon be homeless. He says, I am not against MAiD. What I am against is the expansion of MAiD without the improvements of benefits or quality of life. I mean, it's lopsided. And these are cases of people who are planning for it, but there have already people who have used MAiD to escape their poverty and lack of supports. A title I've tried to read a couple times, but the grammar is really bad. So I'll just say it's a Winnipeg woman who was struggling to get in-home care that she needed. So again, I feel bad, but I have no clue how to pronounce her name. So forgive me, I'm going to have to skip it, but she chose to die even though she didn't want to go just yet. She says, ultimately, it was not a genetic disease that took me out. It was the system. She wrote in an obituary to loved ones. There is a desperate need for change. That is the sickness that causes so much suffering. Vulnerable people need help to survive. I could have had more time if I had more help. As her condition worsened, she needed more in-home care, and that simply was not going to be provided. And from CTV News, woman with chemical sensitivities chose medical-assisted death after failed bid to get better housing. A 51-year-old Ontario woman with severe sensitivities to chemicals chose medical-assisted death after her desperate search for affordable housing free of cigarette smoke and chemical cleaners failed. She said, the government sees me as expendable trash, a complainer, useless, and a pain in the ass. Sophia, not her real name, said in a video filmed February 14th, 8 days before her death. And she shared it with the CTV News. She had been trying for years to simply get a place that she could live in. That simple support, and she'd still be with us today. What does it communicate to folks with disabilities when the government won't support us and give us and provide us with the services we need, but they will support us with dying? And next year, it will be expanded to people with mental health issues, people like me. I have a couple articles about this aspect of it. I'm not going to go through them, but they're linked below for you to read for yourself. One is from CTV News, The Death Debate, Why Some Welcome Canada's Move to Assisted Dying for Mental Illness and Others Fear It. And another one, why I resigned from the Federal Expert Panel on Medical Assistance in Dying, and that's from the Globe and Mail. They're linked below, and they give you some added information of the complexities of allowing people with mental health issues to access medical assistance in dying. This is something that I can speak to personally because I've suffered with mental health issues basically my entire life. And here's the really grotesque part of this. Mental health isn't covered under Canada's universal health care, but now the government will cover helping us to die. And I've seen people question this claim that it's not covered under the universal health care because they've seen people in programs for mental health receiving treatment, so it must be covered. Quick question. If it's covered, then why in any standard work insurance is one of the benefits therapy? There are few programs funded by provinces, but fluctuates and relies on the party in power to give a damn. The wait list for these programs can be years long. For people in mental health crisis, that is not acceptable. People may have to wait a year to see a counselor covered by the province only to find out that they aren't compatible with that counselor or the type of therapy they're offering. In the weeks after my suicide attempt, I had to look for counseling, and the free clinics I was directed to are ones designed for people who need life coaching. Maybe the person just lost their job or went through a breakup. I was rejected from them because they said I was in crisis and needed help. Yeah, no kidding. I had to pay out of pocket for a therapist I found who I was comfortable with. Luckily, that person had a sliding scale and I was employed at the time, so my benefits covered some of the sessions. A lot of people going through what I went through can't get the help they need. The government doesn't help us to live, but they'll help us to die. How does this conversation even sound? Doctor, I feel like killing myself. That's bad. Have you considered MAiD? Will suicide prevention even be a thing anymore under this? Like, what is the difference between somebody committing suicide and the government offering this instead of offering any other treatment? How can this be allowed? What does this communicate to us about our worth? I feel like whenever I make a video about disabilities or end up in a chat with others, I'm constantly having to justify our existence. And I hate this because every day I have to justify my existence to myself. Just because we don't serve capitalism the way the ruling class wants doesn't make us a burden. The amount a person pays into taxes doesn't make a person better than anyone else. I don't deserve less because I haven't had a full-time job all my life. All of us deserve a life with dignity. People who rely on disability supports receive around $1,000 a month, depending on the province you're in. Justin Trudeau once famously said the bare minimum needed to survive is $2,000 a month. Forcing people to live in dire poverty without access to the supports, treatments, or basic needs to survive, and instead offering them MAiD is coercion. If a person with disabilities is about to lose their housing and their options are to die peacefully in their home or to die on the streets, that's not a choice. Unhoused folks don't die of old age. They die of disease, despair, the elements, or violence. If you have a disability, it means you're less likely to be able to get off the streets and more likely to die sooner. And I've seen people comment on stories like this saying that if the reason a person is applying for MAiD is because of poverty, or if they acknowledge that they don't really want to die, then they won't qualify. Just like the stories that have already happened, people will omit that information. They will lie, not because they want to die, but because the fear of living has become stronger than the fear of death. It's not a fair choice. And any person to use MAiD for these reasons is one too many. It's a tragedy, and it's the result of policy failures. But not all hope is lost. Bill C-22, the Canada Disability Act, has gone to committee. This will give people with disability supports enough to pay rent and buy groceries, so there'll be no need for them to apply for MAiD. This bill was introduced into Parliament November of last year, and it just passed the second reading and went to committee. CERB went through Parliament and was signed off in less than a month. There has been delay after delay, and I have no doubt it has cost people lives. Now Carla Qualtrough, the Liberal who sponsored this bill, says it will bring hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty. Over 20% of Canadians live with at least one disability, yet make up over 40% of people with low income, which means over 1 million people with disabilities live with poverty. Those numbers should be taken with a huge grain of salt because they are skewed by the government and are likely much higher. What the government says the poverty line is and what the reality of people struggling with poverty is are two different things. Bill C-22 does not include seniors. People like less laundry. Once a person turns 65, they're no longer a person with disabilities. Who the government says qualifies as a person with a disability and the reality of people living with disabilities are two different things. There's no excuse for this bill to be taking as long as it has been. There's no excuse for it not covering everyone who needs it regardless of age or disability. This bill won't be an automatic increase for people already living off of disability supports, and it's yet to be seen who and how to qualify. I fear for many people, this bill will change nothing. I believe when MAiD was originally set up, the intentions were good. And I still think the overall intentions are good, and I want MAiD to exist. But it doesn't matter what the intentions were. What matters is what's happening. Some people with disabilities, some people with mental health issues will be applying for it, not because they believe their life could never get better, but because they've given up on believing the world gives a damn about them. We need to do better. Yeah, tough video. I want my channel to have more comedy, but when talking about politics and removing the maple wash from this country, not always going to be easy. Please don't forget to hit buttons and leave comments. If you feel it's important to have videos like this out there and are in a position to help, you can support my channel by becoming a patron or purchase something off my wish list to help build my studio. A special thanks to those of you who already have. Salut, à la prochaine! Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.